Hi everyone, in this video we're going to start the discussion of the Catalan opening. At the end of the video there will be a nice exercise for you to practice the new ideas, so make sure to watch this video till the end. And if you are for the first time here, don't forget to subscribe. Catalan may arise from different openings, but some elements are always the same. For example, d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to f3, knight to f6, and g3. So as you can see, a part of it looks like a normal Queen's Gambit declined, and here is also the fianchetto of the light squared bishop. So this time we're going to discuss basic ideas behind the Catalan and also look at some critical lines in Open Catalan. What does it mean? Well, you will learn it shortly. So let's start with Black's most natural try here. So what happens if Black simply captures the pawn on c4? So just like in Queen's Gambit accepted, this usually leads to the situation in which White gets some advantage in the center. For now though, it's not so simple to exploit. So I mean something like e4 followed by pushing pawns is not possible right away. Moreover, it may look not very natural after the move g3, because whenever you push your e-pawn, there is a problem with the vulnerability of the knight and the diagonal in general. So it's just a part of the compensation, usually. Another important thing that happens here is that the diagonal h1, a8 is being open. And that is what White is usually trying to get here. And that is probably the most important idea behind Catalan, to get an active bishop on the long diagonal, just like in English opening, for example, and to exert long-term pressure on Black's queen side. At the same time, since there is no pawn on d5 anymore, to use the edge in the center at some point, just pushing pawns there. Let's have a look at the typical example here. So if you captured the pawn on c4, you usually may want to keep it, otherwise you just gave up a center. For example, a6 here, castling, obviously it's just one line in the sea of different options for both sides. Knight goes to c6, exerting some pressure on the d4 pawn and hence preventing White from jumping with the knight to e5, for instance. White may try e3 here. The move looks a bit passive for now, but it does make the knight free to maneuver and jump anywhere where it's needed. Bishop to d7 looks very strange because bishop is not really active here, but the main idea is just to support the knight c6 and make b7, b5 possible, because if you do something like b5 immediately, you weaken the long diagonal even more, and it is possible for White to use that fact and exploit the pin along it. So after bishop to d7, knight is protected, and whenever pawn is attacked on c4, it's possible to protect it with the b5 move. For example, after queen e2 and b5, as you may notice, Black managed to kind of win a pawn for now. But it doesn't come without consequences. So rook may go to d1. As you can see, White is ready to jump with the knight to e5, for instance. Even if there will be no pin, it may be very dangerous for Black, at least very annoying, because if knight takes knight and pawn takes, there will be a pressure on knight f6, immediate attack on that knight, and also some concrete play along the d file. Black may try rook to b8, now at least there is no pin, and what's interesting from here, the rook may go to b6 to support the knight on c6. And White may consider different things. One of the typical options is to undermine c4, and after more or less forced c captures b3 and a captures on b3, there is a pressure along the a file. So now you may notice parts of White's compensation for missing pawns. So first, a strong center. Second, more active pieces, potentially at least. You can see that Black has some problems with the coordination. This bishop is quite passive. What's really interesting here is that now C file and A file are open and only White can actually use them. So on the A file there is a 6 pawn, which is weak, And on the c file, there is a problem with the backward c7 pawn and also the c5 square, which may become a great outpost for white's knight in the future. So another thing that we have discussed already is obviously the center. For now, a6 is hanging, black may try queen to c8 to protect it, and then white may start these active operations in the center. Just e4, bishop e7, knight to c3, for example, castling, then bishop to f4. As you can see, white's pieces occupy very natural yet super active squares without problems. So it's not that hard stuff for white to find active move here, while black has to be very accurate not to make the position seriously worse. Rook goes to d8, rook goes to c1, queen goes to b7, and for example d5. Already here we can stop. It's clear that the position is quite complex, but there is a feeling that white is just getting what he or she wants faster than black. So black still needs to do a lot to place the pieces correctly, while white's pieces are already occupying great positions. There is already quite concrete play against black's weaknesses. So this is sort of major thing that may happen in various Catalan lines. So white is sacrificing the pawn, not necessarily in each and every line, but white is ready to sacrifice that pawn. Instead of protecting it, overprotecting it, white is kind of winning some time for active operations in the center, makes the bishop, a Catalanian bishop, very active on the long diagonal, and tries to compensate missing material, missing pawn with active play with all of the pieces. That's the key thing here. So not only one piece, the Catalanian bishop gets something from this sacrifice, literally each and every piece, because of the advantage in space, gets some objects of attack and some perspectives. Now let's have a look at some more concrete things that may happen in Open Catalan. And the first question is, what is Open Catalan? Let's have a look. So normally, black is not in a rush with capturing that pawn, although that is also absolutely a valid line. The main line goes bishop to e7 here, bishop goes to g2, then both sides castle. And we have the first critical position, where black has a strategic choice between two completely different directions. So the Open Catalan, to be clear, that is how I call these lines, open and closed. So the Open Catalan is the one which starts with d takes c4, exactly here. So black is not doing anything to overprotect d5 to make the diagonal close for the bishop, and just captures on c4, with the idea being to compensate the missing pawn in the center with active pieces play. So black is indeed trying to open up a position here to get rid of the d4 or to bring other pieces to active positions. And the main idea behind this direction is to actually bring the light squared bishop to the long diagonal a8, h1 as soon as possible. Because as you can see, when the pawn is on d5, this diagonal can be considered more or less closed. Once the pawn disappears, this diagonal becomes quite open, which makes the bishop on g2 very active. And if you fail to solve this problem, in this particular case, to bring on bishop to this diagonal on c6 or b7, doesn't matter. The point is to have the bishop there. Then at some point, knight will jump to e5, that is a typical thing, and there will be a problem. A serious problem for black to complete the development, to get rid of this vulnerabilities, and so on. So immediate knight to e5 is a possibility for white. The main line goes like queen to c2, attacking the c4, but we will have a look at both of them. Now a few words about the closed Catalan that we're going to cover in the other video, and how is it different. So the closed Catalan starts with the move c6, and it's absolutely different direction, because in this case black is trying to do everything to keep this diagonal closed. So as you can see, it's absolutely different idea. The one is to open that diagonal and to fight for it, with on bishop. And another one is to keep it completely closed so that opponent's bishop never gets active. In this video, we are focused on d5 takes c4. So, as I mentioned, there are two options for white to attack this pawn immediately. They are queen to c2 and knight to e5. Queen to c2 is considered the main line. What happens if white just plays knight e5? As I said it already, it looks like a very natural move because not only it attacks the pawn on c4, it also makes bishop g2 already exert some pressure on this long diagonal and prevents the development of black's light square bishop. In this case, it appears that black has very interesting move that will probably never come to your mind if you don't know it exists. So it is knight to c6. At first glance, looks like a completely wrong decision because it damages the pawn structure. And now white has two options. White may capture with the bishop or with the knight. Let's start with taking with the bishop. So bishop captures the knight. We have to take back. And now look at these pawns. They look terrible. But the achievement, which is already apparent, is that white no longer has a Catalan bishop. And black still has a light square bishop, which means whenever c6 is captured or it goes somewhere, for example to c5, then diagonal a8, h1 will belong to black. So knight takes c6, queen goes to e8, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, and the only drawback that black has here is the pawn structure, so it's rather vulnerable. But if black is active enough, for example after queen a4, black plays e5, just opening the position and bringing the light square bishop to active position quickly. So if black does this successfully, then there will be a huge compensation. Just for example, d takes e5, queen takes e5, now queen captures on c4, white is indeed a pawn up, but look at this position. Bishop goes to e6, and black is just much better developed. White still has to develop the complete queen side, while black is ready to start the attack using either a8, h1 diagonal or squares like h3, e2 is under constant pressure, queen can be maneuvered anywhere, consider squares like h5 or e4 or d5 depending on what is available. Rooks also have no problems with being centralized, the one can go to d8, another one to e8, so at very least black has a good compensation here for missing pawn. At best, maybe black is even dominating. So that is about taking on c6 with the bishop. Let's have a look at the capturing on c6 with the knight. So in this position, white decides to keep the Catalan bishop and takes on c6 with the knight, where after b captures c6 and white has a choice again. So it's possible to take on c6, but since there is no rush in this particular case because, well, there is no a strategic problem like in the previous line with bishop takes c6, which was, you know, the vulnerability of the long a8, h1 diagonal and black's possibility to occupy that diagonal quickly, white may find it more useful to develop the pieces because these pawns are so bad that it will not go away. But bishop takes c6 is not wrong, so it's possible. If you want, you can take here. But the thing is, in this case, black is compensating the worse pawn structure with very active pieces play. Already after rook b8, we can see that white will have some problems with developing the dark square bishop because b2 is always under pressure. White should continue with the development anyway, so knight to c3 looks pretty natural. And black may play this bishop b7. And this is already quite a good achievement because there is no Catalan bishop anymore on the board. Again, the only problem is the pawn structure, maybe the absence of the pawn on d5 so that white can grab some space in the center. But as for the rest, black is doing perfect. So queen goes to d7 here to control light squares and to prepare another rook to b8, literally preventing white's bishop from going anywhere. So bishop is on c1, it's quite passive. Now after e4, d4 is also quite vulnerable. So in the game we're discussing here, white decided to play f3, overprotecting e4, probably intending to move the knight somewhere. And black responded with the c5. and it's not that hard to understand that black is grabbing the initiative because black is better developed. Black is creating concrete threats in the center while white is still struggling to complete the development. So as you can see, this pawn structure is bad indeed, but if black correctly puts the pieces on active positions and knows what to do, actually what to attack, what to exert pressure on, then this worse pawn structure is well compensated. Let's have a look at one modern approach for white to attack these weaknesses, in which case white is not in a rush with capturing pawns, but rather tries to complete a development and put pieces on much more active positions than in this particular example. So here, instead of taking on c6 and literally forcing the rook to the amazing b file, white may try knight to a3 move. Looks a bit ugly, but the idea is very simple. White wants to grab another pawn, not the one on c6, but the one on c4, which looks even more important. If the knight takes there, it can go to e5 with further attack on c6. If c4 will be captured, c5 will be completely open, and nothing will stop white from attacking these pawns on c6 and c7. So, very natural move. Why a3? Well, it's simple to understand as well, because d4 is under pressure, so to put the knight on, at first glance, more natural d2 square, you need to protect d4 first, so it takes time. Knight a3 hence appears to be much more efficient solution to that. If black really wants to prevent white from capturing the pawn on c4, because it's not the only resource to attack the pawn, there's also queen that may join the attack at any moment. Well, the only chance for black is just to take that knight, which gives white a pair of bishops. In this case, white fails to grab the pawn on c4 with the knight and bring that knight to attack c6, but pair of bishops in the open position may be also very dangerous. That is what white is trying to exploit in this situation. Again, black has several problems here. The main now is how to activate the bishop. We have seen that in case white captures on c6 this or that way, it's not that hard, right? So we either occupy one of the open diagonals or exchange the Catalanian bishop. In this case, with the pawn still on c6, it's not that obvious how to achieve that. So black may try bishop to a6 move here, which looks very natural. Bishop is anyway much better on a6 compared to c8, and from here it protects c4. And we should understand that at any moment black gets an opportunity to play something like c3, that bishop may become a real power attacking e2, for example. It's also an interesting piece to prevent white from immediate queen a4 or something, attacking c4, because in that case there will be just bishop b5. So white will simply lose time in that case. So instead of playing queen a4, white plays very interesting and subtle move queen to d2. Why it's interesting and subtle? Because instead of developing the dark squared bishop, which would be the most natural idea, the most natural desire in such a situation, white is actually trying to exploit the not very obvious weakness that has arisen in black's camp after all these changes of the pawn structure. It is the a5 square. And by the way, you should remember it because a5 is often used by white's pieces in Catalan. In this particular case, it is the queen who tries to exploit this weakening, but in some lines it can be the bishop. We will also see that a bit later in this video. So after queen d2 and rook to b8, natural move, occupying the b file, queen jumps to a5 to attack the bishop. Now I think the idea is more or less clear. If black wants to keep that bishop on this diagonal, it's probably important just to protect it, because something like bishop to b5 may lead to a4, and it's unclear how to keep position materially balanced. So queen to c8 or rook to b6 should be played here. One of the moves is exactly this, queen to c8, where after white continues with the a4, controlling b5 square, and hence preventing rook from going to b5, and preparing stuff like bishop to a3, attacking the rook, maybe bring the bishop to c5 to attack c7, so there are different ideas here for white. Rook goes to d8, attacking d4. Bishop goes to a3. Pay attention to how white is actually sacrificing everything here. And this makes position just more open, which is great for bishops. Rook captures on d4. Bishop goes to c5, attacking the rook. And attacking a7 at the same time. So I want to draw your attention again to the spirit of the position we're dealing with here. It's indeed non-standard. So as you can see, we have a complete mass on the queen side now. All the pawns of both sides are quite weak here. And white is not in a rush to collect them. So white is trying to put the pieces to the right squares here, and only when everything is ready to grab black's weaknesses one by one. No surprises that having so many extra pawns here, although quite bad if we talk about the quality, black tries to improve the pawn structure, and one of the interesting ways to do that is to sacrifice an exchange. So here, after bishop to c5, black may choose this square instead of going somewhere to d8 or d7, which is quite passive. Black puts the rook on d5 where it can be captured. And it's not that good idea for white to do that. So for example, if bishop captures on d5, there is just c takes d5, I believe, improving the pawn structure. And as mentioned before, now black has so many pawns to compensate that, and these pawns are rather good. If you imagine all these guys start moving, it can be very dangerous. So I guess in this case, black has good compensation. So sometimes if you look at games that are played within this line, you may find ideas like rook to b6, also trying to sacrifice the exchange, but at the same time improve the pawn structure. Again, just imagine something like rook on b6, bishop b6, and c takes b6, and the pawn structure all of a sudden becomes not that bad for black on the queen side. And all these pawns can move later on. So that is about this direction. Very interesting one with the knight to a3. Just a general advice. If you want to play something like this with either white or black, you have to analyze a lot. So according to the theory and practice, this position is pretty much balanced, but there are so many different nuances, and one little inaccuracy may change the evaluation dramatically. So analysis and practice should help in improving your results here. Let's have a look at the other very interesting direction. So in this position, instead of playing knight to e5, white may choose a good old line, queen to c2, attacking the pawn. And now there is the same problem like in Queen's Gambit Accepted, so black cannot play something like b5 easily without consequences. So normally black decides not to be that greedy and plays a6 here to be ready for white's queen takes c4. So as I said before, black is now trying to bring the light square bishop to this diagonal to fight opponent's bishop on g2. So basically to fight for this diagonal. It doesn't come without weakening of some squares, but well, that's the price. So now white can capture the pawn immediately. There is no problem with that. In this case, black responds with the b7, b5 tempo move, so weakening the diagonal, but since the queen is attacked, black has time to bring the bishop there. Queen goes to c2, bishop goes to b7, and that's basically what black wanted to get. So the fight for the long diagonal now. The problem is, after a6, b5, especially after b5, both c5 and a5 squares are weakened, and white is trying to use both of them. And one of the most natural and interesting moves here is bishop to d2. It's pretty much modern approach to this line of the Catalan. So c5 is not that hard to occupy, but a5 maybe not so simple. So white is starting exactly with the a5. And what is the point here? For example, if black plays bishop e4, queen goes to c1, and now let's say knight to d7, normal development. And to mention, black's main idea here is just to play c5. If black plays c5 at some point, in the vast majority of cases, position is being simply equalized. So exactly here comes bishop to a5, attacking the pawn and pinning it, preventing black from playing c5. And after rook to c8, for example, knight to d2, pretty much forcing the bishop away. White continues with the queen to c2, pawn is still pinned, as you may notice. And white has great chances just to put the rook on c1 and then, if necessary, to stop black from playing c5 completely by something like b4. So, in other words, there will be a constant, at least a long-term pressure against c7 pawn, which is quite annoying. So that is the idea behind bishop d2. And black may fight it with the help of interesting c6 move. Let's have a look at it. So exactly in this position, instead of playing knight to d7, black may try c6 move. So slightly passive, but black is controlling a5, preventing white from playing bishop to a5. Very nice prophylaxis in my opinion. White may continue with different moves. One of them is just rook to d1. Since bishop doesn't go to a5, maybe it's a good idea to have e1 square forward just in case bishop is actually interfering with the coordination. Knight to d7 now. Knight goes to c3, attacking the bishop. Since bishop doesn't have good squares on this diagonal anymore, it goes to g6 here. And black's last problem is actually this c6, which is rather weak if it stays there. So black really wants to play c5 as soon as possible. And white is trying to prevent it. And to be honest, it's not so simple because white is ready to play b4 already, and playing something like c5 right now, it's quite risky because you open the diagonal where your rook is, and the opening of the d file is potentially quite dangerous for queen. So instead, black usually plays rook to c8 just to make one more move to prepare c5. White already can play this b4, and c5 is stopped, which means this is a constant problem now for black, this pawn on c6. But b4 also weakens something in white's camp, and black may try to use it. So for example, in one of the games, black tried knight to d5 move. The idea being to simplify these things to fight white's e4 move, because now if white plays e4, there is an exchange on c3 and bishop takes on e4. And the knight is simply getting closer to white's light squared weaknesses on the queen side. You may notice this c4 square, this square may be occupied by the knight from d5 going through b6 there, or maybe another knight from d7 may go there at some point. There is also an idea of playing a5 at some point, undermining b4, and if white doesn't react, black may take that pawn and make that a target, a weakness to attack. So I would say that this position is pretty much balanced. Now let's have a look at the other option for white. So taking on c4 immediately is not the only one. So in this position, instead of immediately capturing on c4, white may try playing a4, stopping black from playing b5. Now c4 can be captured next move, and this is a sign for black that it's time to maneuver the light squared bishop, because if white manages to grab the c4 and then go away with the knight somewhere, there will be a problem with the development, and black will fail to embody the main idea of the Open Catalan, so to fight for the long diagonal. That's why bishop to d7 is the main move here, and after queen captures on c4, this bishop immediately gets to c6. And black's position starts looking very, very solid. For example, bishop goes to g5, now bishop to d5, queen goes to c2, and now bishop to e4. So as you can see, black is doing everything to prevent white from occupying the center that easily. Queen steps back to c1. Now, for example, h6, bishop captures on f6, bishop captures on f6, and black is getting a pair of bishops. But white is getting some edge in the center now, because black no longer controls central squares that great without the knight on f6. After rook to d1 and a5, very interesting idea, just to fix the weakness of the b4 square and to prepare a good outpost for the knight there. Knight goes to d2, bishop goes to h7, knight goes to c4, now c6. So bishop is no longer on that diagonal, but it's not passive, so it's quite good on h7. And c6 is quite logical. Now this tandem of b7 and c6 makes bishop on g2 not that dangerous. Knight goes to e5, knight goes to a6, for example, e4, grabbing some space in the center, knight goes to b4, rook goes to a3, and we get this rather typical position in which white has some edge in the center, but black has pair of bishops, which is probably not that important right now because position is not that open and these bishops don't have too many targets. And this position is pretty balanced, so we can notice that white has an obvious edge in the center, controlling more squares, probably slight advantage in space. But to be honest, everything is pretty solid in black's camp. There are no obvious weaknesses to attack. And normally when you have such a center, you want to expand more and to play something like d5 at some point to actually use this advantage somehow. But in this particular case, d5 is not that great, well, at least not in each and every case, because this will mean a serious opening of the position, and that is exactly what black wants for on bishops. So bishops can be great only in the open position. But all in all, that is something that may happen if the long diagonal is closed. So it's hard to do anything with the bishop, so white tries in that case to do something in the center. With this, we conclude the discussion of the Open Catalan, and let's get to the exercise part. Here's the position we have seen in the video already, where black continued with the rook to d5. We have discussed it's an interesting possibility for black to sacrifice the exchange positionally. The question is, though, what happens if black puts the rook to a passive square d8? Well, to be honest, it's absolutely valid move, so there is no punishment for it whatsoever. It's probably just not as promising as rook to d5, and it gives white more options compared to that. So I believe that the most interesting way for white to play here is to put the rook on b1 and to try to fight for the b file. There is additional option of taking an a7 at some point to make sure that b file is occupied and white actually wins the fight for it. So in the game we are discussing, though, white decided to try the d file. So after rook to d1, black continued with the capturing the rook, and then immediate c3, activating the bishop. So we have discussed this idea already. Queen captured on c3, bishop captured on e2, and at the moment you may notice how black's pieces are getting extra space. So after white's rook to e1, you can argue that maybe it's not the best move and so on. Indeed, white's play here is not ideal, but we're just making moves from the game, getting to our exercise position. Queen goes to a6, then bishop to d4, and here we go. So at the moment, white is attacking on the king side and trying to create some threats there, using the fact that black's pieces are far away on the queen side or elsewhere. So your task here is to find the best continuation for black. It's not obvious whatsoever, but working on this exercise should help you a lot, especially in understanding how black's pieces are coordinated in this particular line. The solution will be presented in a separate video. Make sure to subscribe to be notified about that video, and you can also share your solutions in the comments below. Thanks a lot for watching. See you.